Good evening. The last of the Kennedy brothers today invested his family's prestige in the candidacy of Hubert Humphrey. Senator Edward Kennedy welcomed Mr. Humphrey to the city of Boston and was as demonstrative in praising him as demonstrators were in denouncing him. ABC's Lou Cioffi has the story.
And my friends, I have no hesitancy. I have no hesitancy in urging the support of the election of the Vice President of the United States to the presidency.
What should have been a great day in Boston for Vice President Humphrey has turned into something of a minor catastrophe. Despite the fact that Teddy Kennedy was at his side, the crowds that gathered in the main square of Boston, for some reason, happened to seem to be at least the majority of peace demonstrators. Throughout the demonstration, they shouted and shouted down the speakers who were trying to make themselves heard. They even shouted down Senator Kennedy himself. And of course, when Vice President Humphrey got up to speak, the shouts got louder, the gestures wilder.
But we shall not move this country forward. We shall not move this country forward if this nation of ours is to be plagued by those who would deny free speech, if it is to be plagued by those who would deny freedom of assembly, if it is to be plagued by those who seek to shout down those who express the voice of reason. And
how this many peace demonstrators were allowed in this center of the city is not known at this time. Someone made a mistake. There seems to be a very, very few people here who are pro-Vice President Humphrey. The entire square is ringed by demonstrators, all yelling for peace, carrying their signs, calling for Dump the Hump. In spite of the bad reception that has been received here by Vice President Humphrey, there is one good sign in all of this, that men like Senator Kennedy have decided to come aboard the Humphrey bandwagon to try to heal the badly split Democratic Party and to work actively for Mr. Humphrey's election. This is one of the things that the campaign manager, Larry O'Brien, has been trying to do, trying to get the Democrats to reunify after their almost disastrous convention in Chicago. And he's been arguing with the Democrats that this is the only way to win. This is Lou Cioffi, ABC News, with the Humphrey campaign in downtown Boston.
Chances appear rather slim for a television debate involving Vice President Humphrey, Mr. Nixon, and George Wallace. The House Commerce Committee today voted 22-10 to permit the networks to make time available for three-way debates, but there then followed some complicated parliamentary maneuvering by Republican and Southern Democrats, which will have the net effect of delaying consideration by the full House, and that delay may mean no debate at all.
It's dawn, and the battle is just about to begin. It's the battle every eye must fight every day of its life. It's the fight against eye pollution. Soot, ashes, dust, dirt, exhaust. They're in the air, and they get in your eye. Nature gave your eye the ability to clean itself. But this big load of impurities, this eye pollution, is too much for it to handle. It gets tired, irritated, uncomfortable, red. How do you win the battle against eye pollution? Use Murine. Murine cleans, soothes, comforts the eye. And unlike some things you put in your eye, you can use Murine every day, as often as you want to. Murine. It's the pure and simple solution to eye pollution.
Richard Nixon said today that he does not believe in government by Gallup poll, and he added the blanket of consensus makes for mediocrity. In a radio address to be delivered later tonight, Mr. Nixon says that if elected president, he will choose an administration that includes Democrats and independents as well as Republicans. Mr. Nixon campaigned in the Midwest today after spending yesterday in the Far West. ABC's Don Farmer has that story, starting in Fresno, California.
The Nixon campaign has picked up pace these past 2 days. Offhand, this might seem like a casual after-lunch break, but nothing Nixon has been doing is casual. Everything has political significance, even munching grapes. For this is Fresno, California, where striking migrant workers seeking higher pay have dramatized their grievances by urging a boycott of California grapes. Nixon opposes the boycott. About 50 demonstrators entered the arena and tried to disrupt the proceedings with noisy chants of "We want justice" and "Long live the strike." There was one minor scuffle, but police exercised considerable restraint. They left the demonstrators alone after a time, and the protesters soon gave up. The Nixon theme of party unity was repeated in Salt Lake City last night. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir sang patriotic song, and George Romney, once a candidate himself, was there to endorse the GOP ticket. Nixon spoke of hostility shown to candidates, especially Hubert Humphrey.
And the Vice President of the United States and the office he holds, they deserve respect wherever they go, and I know they should get that respect wherever they come.
Nixon also promised to end the Vietnam War, but he scored most heavily with his conservative audience when he talked of problems at home, especially law and order and the courts.
I have argued a case before the Supreme Court of the United States on 2 occasions. I respect that court and all our courts. But my friends, as I look over the decisions of that and other courts in recent years, I have reached the conclusion that some of our courts have gone too far in their decisions in weakening the peace forces as against the criminal forces in this country, and we must restore that balance.
Nixon is confident of winning Utah's 4 electoral votes, so confident that he probably will not return to Utah before the November election. This is Don Farmer reporting.
Senate Republican leader Everett Dirksen said today that if the president were to withdraw the nomination of Abe Fortas to be Chief Justice of the United States, it would, in Dirksen's words, save a lot of discussion and a lot of juicy headlines. But Dirksen added that he is not recommending withdrawal of the Fortas nomination. In a moment, politics in the hometown of Harry Truman.
Come live up here. Come live in a lemon tree house, a lemon pledge tree house, where everything is so fresh and clean. Discover how easily Lemon Pledge gives you the beauty of waxing with none of the work every time you dust. See how fast Lemon Pledge cleans as it waxes to a beautifully bright shine, a protective hard wax shine. And look at that Lemon Pledge luster, so warm and glowing. Lemon Pledge, the fresh, clean way to get waxed beauty instantly as you dust, every time you dust. Make your house a Lemon Pledge house. Pledge, lemon or regular, both from Johnson Wax.
Myrtle Selder's day maid at the Grand Hotel and Hilda Gilman, night maid, fought for 10 years. Because every morning Myrtle gave the floors a nice wax shine. And every night, Hilda ruined that shine with detergents. But then Myrtle discovered Bravo. The floor wax so tough, detergents can't make it dull. The girls are working together now, because detergents can't remove Bravo. That takes a strong solution of ammonia with a powdered floor cleaner.
So if you're your own day maid and night maid, don't work against yourself.
Use a floor wax so tough, detergents can't make it dull. Bravo from Johnson Wax.
George Wallace is in Montgomery, Alabama today. As always these days, the center of attention wherever he goes, north or south. Last night, Wallace drew big crowds in Kansas City, Missouri. Today in Montgomery, it's George Wallace Day, and the candidate hopes to raise $1 million to finance a strong closing drive in his campaign. Wallace sentiment is strong, even in unexpected places. ABC's Peter Jennings checked out Independence, Missouri, and files this report.
This is the home of Harry S. Truman, still without question the most popular politician in Independence, Missouri. Since Mr. Truman won the presidency, this city has voted consistently with the winner. After Mr. Truman, Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. In the fall of this year, however, there is much evidence to suggest that now Independence people will vote not necessarily for the winner, but for the spoiler. Chet Burnham is a lifelong Democrat who's been selling gas on this corner for 37 years. One of his customers is Noel Fields, also a lifelong Democrat, who's the prosperous owner of a cut-rate furniture store. Fields and Burnham will both vote this year for George Wallace. Fields because he believes Wallace is the only man who can rid the government of communists. He says that 99% of the administration is red. Burnham will vote Wallace because, like the new gas stations he has to compete with, he believes that government is getting too big.
Good morning there.
Morning.
Noel Fields is always there when talk is of Wallace. He ran for Congress some years back. His campaign manager was Robert Depew, who went on to head the Minutemen. The cross-section of people voting Wallace that we met included a newspaper reporter who writes editorials praising Wallace, a television repairman, and the floor manager from a large department store. All of them believe fervently that Wallace is the candidate who represents the little guy.
Governor Wallace reminds them of Harry Truman. He's got guts and he'll fight. And God knows we haven't had any guts in Washington since Truman left.
The man that all these people admire more than George Wallace is no longer in public life and is rarely seen except during an occasional visit to the barber shop. Independence itself remains fairly sleepy in spite of a population explosion. Many have come here to get away from nearby Kansas City and the Negro unrest they fear there. Incomes are below the national average, but Wallace support is not limited to low-income groups or those who come from farther south. Bob Marcus is a native Missourian and vice president of a bank. He will vote for Wallace because Wallace won't force a gun control law. Gene Graham is a lawyer who'll vote for Wallace, though to say so publicly he feels could hurt his business. He's always voted Republican. Doyle Evans, on the other hand, voted twice for Adlai Stevenson. He says he reads too much bad news. He'll vote Wallace. Bill Camerlink was on his way to work. He didn't like any of the candidates, but as far as he was concerned, Wallace at least tells it like it is. On a lucky day, we met the former president. He was fit and friendly. If he was aware of the Wallace phenomenon, he didn't want to talk about it, nor did he care to talk about Humphrey or Nixon. People we talked to here actually compared Wallace and Truman, saying that both men gave the establishment hell. Mr. Truman gave this reporter a little hell. The first thing he told me was that I needed a haircut. In the course of this campaign, politicians will see a lot of Main Street USA. This is only one of them. 100 miles from here, conditions may be different. Here, however, the talk is of George Wallace. As one citizen put it, if the two major parties were looking for a clear win in independence, they should have run another Harry Truman. This is Peter Jennings in Independence, Missouri.
And before Peter Jennings goes back to Mr. Truman's hometown, he will get a haircut. In a moment, a commentary on the Wallace campaign by Bill Moyers.
Put 5 chefs in one kitchen, and what happens? An argument. The only thing all 5 agree on is that Blue Bonnet margarine has 5 kinds of flavor.
Frying flavor. Baking flavor. Melting flavor. Dipping flavor.
Breading flavor. Blue Bonnet's got 5 kinds of flavor.
Everything's better with the Blue Bonnet on it.
No argument here. Blue Bonnet, stick or soft.
What's the Today way to start a party? The Today Nuts from Platters in the blue and yellow can. And for snappy snacking, dry roasted nuts in the slim waist jar, using absolutely no fats or oils that add calories. What's the Today way to pack your snack? The Today Nuts in the handy cello pack. For an any time of day munch or a get-together with the bunch, get the Today Nuts from Platters. And get them today.
Today's guest commentator, Bill Moyers, used to be President Johnson's news secretary and now is a newspaper publisher. Mr. Moyers has taken a long look at George Wallace's strength and has drawn some conclusions.
Almost overnight, the pressure from the left on Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey has subsided. The pressure is now coming from the right in the form of George Wallace. 6 weeks ago, the word was that Wallace would take more votes away from Nixon than from Humphrey. Now no one is quite sure of that. A few days ago, I happened to be in East Texas at the same time a rally was being held for Wallace. He wasn't there, but he was represented by the retired General Edwin A. Walker, the reactionary general who left the Army in 1962 after claiming that he had been muzzled by the Pentagon. The crowd contained the usual number of rednecks,
but there were plenty of people who were neither racists nor right-wingers. They were just plain folks, people who have voted Democratic ever since Franklin Roosevelt saved their farms and their homes and put them to work during the Depression. There they were, deep East Texas Democrats, hooping it up for Wallace. They're not alone. One of the late Robert Kennedy's closest advisors told me yesterday that on a recent trip to Indiana, whose Democratic primary Kennedy won in May, he was astonished to discover many of the people who voted for Kennedy in May wearing Wallace buttons in September. So Democrats and Republicans now find they have in common that little verse which goes, "As I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish to God he'd go away." Well, Wallace is not going to go away, and Nixon and Humphrey will not help much by trying to hang him around the other's neck. He is a threat to them, but he is a greater threat to that tradition of reason and justice which has taken such a beating already in this quixotic political year. For the appeal of George Wallace points up the extraordinary power of fear to incite the passions and pervert the logic of the human species. That issue, the issue of fear and its exploitation by George Wallace, must be met head-on, not only by Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey, but by every American who wants change without catastrophe. This is Bill Moyers.
Allied military sources believe Saigon may be hit by a third enemy offensive on Monday, which is a Viet Cong holiday. B-52s are trying to prevent the possible enemy attack by bombing suspected enemy staging areas and invasion routes to Saigon. The heaviest bombing today took place near Tai Ninh, 55 miles northwest of Saigon. Ground action was sharper today, mostly in the Mekong Delta, where U.S. troops battered an enemy force some 50 miles from the capital. The 10-hour battle ended with 25 enemy troops killed, 3 Americans died. President Johnson awarded the Medal of Honor to 5 soldiers today for their heroism in Vietnam. ABC's Keith McBee reports from the White House.
Proud winners of the big one, Sergeants David McNerney, Delbert Jennings, Kenneth Stumps. 2 GIs who display their heroism in the same action, Sergeant Leonard Keller and Specialist Raymond Wright. To the critics, to those weary of the war, the President held up their example.
The men who stand here beside me today, impatient men who did not wait in the bunker until the battle was over, but joined it with incredible courage, know that the conflict in Vietnam demands something more than impatience. It demands steadfastness, so that what we have begun in hope will not be discarded in frustration and anger, so that the bravery of these men and their hundreds of thousands of comrades in arms will not have been offered in vain.
Last week, 217 Americans were killed in Vietnam. There were 1,485 U.S. troops wounded. South Vietnamese dead numbered 376. Enemy dead are estimated at 2,484.
Room 611. You're with the business conference, right, sir?
That's right. I'll be here till Tuesday.
Hey, Dick. I didn't think you were going to show.
I wouldn't miss all those boring speeches for the world.
Well, you won't be bored this time.
Is that a promise?
Yep. Hey, you put that cigarette out in a hurry?
Oh, they run out of taste.
It never happens with mine.
Viceroy? What makes them different?
I don't know. They always taste good to me. Taste never quits.
Oh, who is the main speaker anyway?
Me? Will you buy that?
Why not?
Now buy this Viceroy.
It's good.
Like I said, taste never quits.
Fine tobaccos are perfectly matched with the Viceroy filter to make sure the good taste never quits. King size or new extra length Viceroy filter longs. Either way, the good taste never quits.
The Czechoslovak news agency today reports the resignation of Czech Foreign Minister Jiří Hájek and his replacement by Premier Oldřich Černík. Hayek has been denounced by Russia since he asked the UN Security Council to condemn the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. The Soviet bloc invasion has cooled President Johnson's hopes of beginning a new era of closer relations with the Russians. ABC diplomatic correspondent John Scally reports from Washington.
Soviet leaders have strongly hinted they're ready to meet President Johnson at a summit meeting in Geneva later this month to talk about how to control nuclear missiles. The president, however, is showing little enthusiasm for such a conference for fear it would give the impression he was now condoning the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. The president is deeply interested in serious negotiations with the Russians, not only about missiles, but about Vietnam. But before such talks can come about, he believes it indispensable that the Soviets take far-reaching steps to ease their treatment of Czechoslovakia. Any summit meeting before then would get the Soviets off the diplomatic hook where they've placed themselves, denounced by world opinion ever since they brutally cracked down on Czechoslovakia. In addition, American voters of East European descent might bitterly resent the spectacle of Mr. Johnson talking in friendly fashion with the Russians at this time, and they might retaliate by voting en masse for Richard Nixon. So, in view of the political as well as the diplomatic realities, the president is pigeonholing the Soviet request, hoping later developments may make it possible for him to fulfill his dream of a final summit conference to climax his years in the White House. This is John Scally in Washington.
General Eisenhower's condition was described today as the result of a miraculous turnabout. That was the comment of Lieutenant General Leonard Heaton, the Army Surgeon General. He appeared at a White House ceremony proclaiming the week of October 13th Salute to Eisenhower Week. General Heaton said Mr. Eisenhower gets out of bed at times, he sits up in a chair, but no date has been fixed for him to leave the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. The House of Representatives this evening approved the smallest foreign aid appropriation in the nation's history, $1.6 billion. On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were up about 1 point. Nearly 18 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was up 8 cents. On the American Stock Exchange, about 8.5 million shares were traded. The American Exchange Index was up 12 cents. In a moment, a report on the children of Biafra.
In our last episode, glamorous Sheila Smith had become the favorite model of handsome Hal Martin. To Hal, Sheila was just another photogenic face. Then, one day, Sheila took up with Life's Stride shoes.
Miss Smith, there's something about you that's different.
Is that bad?
With Sheila's second pair of Life Strides.
Sheila, you're moving.
How about that?
As today's episode begins...
My dear, how would you like to pose in a wedding gown?
What have I done to deserve this?
Has Sheila Smith tempted fate with Life Stride shoes? Has the march of her career ended at the altar? Well, where there's Life Stride, there's hope. For the nearest place to buy Life Stride shoes, dial direct free, area code 800-243-0355.
Now you can clean your rug this afternoon and entertain guests tonight. Glory does it. Glory, the new spray foam rug cleaner from Johnson Wax.
Just push the button and you get instant foam. It's deep cleaning foam like professionals use. Now sponge it in with a wet mop, let dry, then vacuum. Glory usually dries in only 2 to 4 hours. And just one can cleans a big 10 by 14 rug for less than $2.
Try new Glory. So easy you can clean your rug this afternoon. Entertain guests tonight. Glory, new from Johnson Wax.
We are about to show you a film we have acquired from sources in France. It is part of a documentary on Biafra. As you know, Biafra has been involved in a civil war with Nigeria for more than a year. The war has caused great suffering. That's almost a trite phrase, isn't it? The war has caused great suffering. Our newspapers, radio, and television in this country have reported on the widespread starvation that has resulted from the war. Thousands dead, not from bullets or bombs, but from hunger. You won't like this film, but here is the way it is today in Biafra.
On peut dire qu'après une semaine de soins,
these children have been in this refugee camp for about 1 week. The nurse says there is a definite improvement in their condition, an improvement.
Oh bébé, oh regardez-moi ça,
oui, alors il manque totalement l'habit. Ça, c'est une chose dont nous avons un besoin urgent et pressant, c'est l'habit pour les centaines. Les habits pour les enfants.
Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? Qu'on peut envoyer? Qu'il faut envoyer?
Il faut envoyer tout ce que vous pouvez comme habit, comme couverture, parce que c'est pour on n'a absolument rien à se mettre sur la peau.
Il faut envoyer tout ce qu'on peut, évidemment, comme vêtements, aussi bien, mais ce qui peuvent aux besoins si on enlève.
Alors, il y a toujours des gens de bonne volonté qui peuvent préparer avec simplement avec des tissus, avec
simplement
n'importe
avec
quoi.
du tissu.
Mais qu'ils aient quelque chose pour se mettre, des gens pour se mettre sur le corps pour avoir chaud.
C'est pas possible.
Alors, nous fournissons le coton avec des produits médicaux.
There are human tragedies that are so monstrous they defy comprehension. Biafra is such a disaster because it has not really crashed into the consciousness or the conscience of that part of the world which has enough to eat. Nothing is to be gained by fixing blame. This country of ours is compassionate and generous. We have tried to help, and we have made it clear we are willing to do much more. But the political aims of each side, the Biafrans and the Nigerians, apparently are more important to them than the starvation of their children. The Biafrans will not accept supplies channeled through the central government. The central government will not permit any direct dealings with the Biafrans. That would amount to recognition of the breakaway state. Still, the plight of the children of Biafra and of Nigeria, because the suffering is not limited only to one side, sears us all, as it should. We may, as Americans, bear no direct guilt, but as inhabitants of the same planet, we all share a common responsibility. About all we can say is, God help them. But I'm reminded of John Kennedy's words when he closed his inaugural address. On earth, God's work must be done by men. Surely men can find some way to feed those babies. That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.
Friday, September 27th, the felony squad stayed